I want to kind of start off by talking about time and perception.
Yeah.
And I guess how our perception of time kind of, encourages us or discourages us to do things. I guess we all kind of have this attitude that, we're going to live forever, we're going to be here forever. Let's do things at a later time. But, I think when you look at your life and you look back at your life, it's almost like you had all these things you wanted to do. You said a year ago or 2 years ago and none of them have been done. Why is that? Why is it this perception of time is kind of skewed for everyone? Or I want to talk a little bit about that topic.
Well, I mean, the first area probably to talk about on that surely would be to do with age.
Sure, yeah.
Because if you're young, obviously your perspective of time is going to be different than if you're 50 or 60.
Yeah.
So it's like a 18-year-old, their belief is that they've got all this time, and with time is potential, and it's like, well, I could do anything, and it's like, the thing that you actually come to realize later is that time is finite. It's not infinite like I think you believe it to be when you're younger. So I don't know. I guess that's probably the first place I would start.
Yeah, when you're a child, it kind of feels like the days drag on forever. And then as you grow a little bit older, I guess the days and the years start to disappear a lot quicker than you may have thought. What you said, as an 18-year-old, you kind of think you got unlimited possibilities. But it's because of that factor that perhaps you do nothing, because everything's open to you. You can venture any way you want. You can go into any industry you want. But because of this ultimate possibilities or unlimited possibilities, you kind of stagnate because you're not driven to one or two things.
And I think that stagnation, some will tie in later about the difference between, I suppose, potential and being able to do anything compared to, I suppose, limiting that potential and actually engaging in specific behaviors, through engaging in X, Y, and Z, you have to discount everything else. Yeah. And that is a sacrifice, but it's actually the necessary sacrifice in a sense. So I think there's a twofold thing this episode where we're talking about time in terms of it being a finite thing and how you can actually change your perspective around that, but then also how you can choose which behaviors are actually meaningful to engage in to some extent.
Well, as you said, having unlimited potential, and I want to get your opinion on this, that doesn't mean anything if you don't do something with it, right? The ability to do something is not actually doing it. So unlimited potential is just nothing, right, until you actually take actionable steps.
Yeah. I mean, it's the classic thing of, like, when you're older and you have resources, you have money, etc., the thing you lack is time. But when you're young, you lack resources and you lack, I suppose, experience, but you have the resource of time. It's like this thing of where you got to find this fine line of being able to use your time, but then not putting yourself so deep in some category where you can't actually, I suppose, experience life to some extent. Does that make any sense? Like,
what do you mean by experience life? Like have fun or?
Well, in a sense, if you lock yourself up into certain things, say I'm going to delay living life to some extent for some job where I have to travel a lot or I have to do something that I don't want to do, well, you're disregarding, I suppose, things that might be fundamental and enjoyable to you in life in general. And I think that can be a sacrifice that actually isn't worthwhile because time is the ultimate resource in some extent. Like, are you doing things just for money so that you can, I don't know, experience things later down the track? Or is it that, I suppose what I'm saying is there's a fine line of sacrificing the present, but then also living life fully. And I don't know, it's just something that I think you have to develop over time in a sense.
Well, yeah, I want to get your opinion on this. This whole idea of potential, I guess we live in Australia, you got any option to go to any industry you want. As an 18-year-old, you have the potential to do anything, but that doesn't mean anything if you don't do anything, right?
Well, I mean, we've said it on previous episodes, like, the very fact of being like full of potential, in some sense, if you're only potential, you're nothing. It's like not until you constrain that into something tangible that you actually become something. Like, and I think that's the thing about young people. Like, because they're young and haven't had experience in the world, they haven't had that time to develop into something, in a sense.
So I guess what's the advice for like an 18-year-old? You can do anything. I guess my advice would be you probably want to try out a decent amount of things at that age and see what actually sticks. But, on contrary to that, I would also say you don't want to just chop and change things and spend the next 10 years not fully developing in one avenue. You don't want to start this job, don't like it the next, and just do that 10 times.
Yeah.
You probably want to see, I guess, what am I passionate about maybe and what resonates with me and try all those things and see what sticks.
Well, how do you even make the decision to do something though? Because if you could do anything, like how do you even pick one thing to do?
I mean, it's just about, is it just about actually doing something, no matter what it is, or is it about sitting there and saying, what do I actually want to do? Like, what am I passionate about and doing that? So I think if you spend your whole youth looking for passion, you may do nothing for 5 years.
Yeah. Well, what is passion? Is that just intense interest in something?
Well, yeah, I guess when you're young, you're into sports, you're into music, whatever it is. Do you want to follow that avenue? Do you want to give that do you want to develop that avenue as much as possible? Or do you just want to go in a career to, I guess, secure your financial future?
Yeah. I mean, do you think that is something that you should, if you're intensely interested in, say, something unconventional, that's not the regular path, is that a path that you think people should try and pursue if they can?
I think so, yeah.
Like, what's the trade-off there, though?
The trade-off is you're probably sacrificing, early years of your life. You can make a lot of money, but if that's something you really want to do, it's much better off doing it early instead of, looking back at 40 and saying, I wish, because there's nothing you can do then. So,
yeah, and I suppose while I was researching this, it's sort of like, I think people a lot of the time have this attitude where it's like, I'm just going to delay and delay and delay. And even in a situation where, say I'm in a workplace or something like that and things aren't perhaps how I would like them to be, I'm just going to put up with it for now, and in the future maybe, I don't know, go to a new job, or I might eventually say something. Where it's like, life is finite, like we were saying earlier, and it's like, do you really want to spend any part of your life not actively trying to make it how you want it to be? Yeah. It's like you're literally cutting off something that's so valuable. You're cutting off time in a sense, and it's like your life is your life. In every opportunity, you should be trying to, I suppose, shape it into what you actually want it to be.
Yeah, sure. Right. I mean, every single day you live, you're getting closer to death. How many of those days do you want to waste in, I guess, a situation that you really resent? Whether that's a job, whether it's your friends. If you delay that decision to quit your job, it's going to eat at you away for the rest of your life. And whether it's an extra month or an extra 2 years you spent there, you're not getting that back.
But don't you think, like, people do that though? Yeah. They just, I'll just push it aside. I'll just push it down. Like, I think in doing that, that's when actual maladaptive coping mechanisms come up. And that's when you got to go out on the weekend and get fucking rinsed, or go home and, I don't know, escape into something. It's like, in a book I'm reading right now, Peterson's new book, it's like, it's constantly detailing your life is the adventure. Your life should be the adventure. It's like, don't dip into these other things that are just off the main track in some extent. Like,
are you saying, like, if you do stay down these rabbit holes, you actually pay the price for other avenues, whether that's drinking, that's drugs, it's just going home, watching Netflix every night. Yeah. You cope with, I guess, your inadequacy to make decisions in your own life.
100%. That's reflected psychologically as well. Like,
I guess, we've all been a victim of that. I'll do this tomorrow, I'll change that tomorrow. Or my job's not too bad, I'll just stay a couple more years, it may get better, but you pay the price, and the ultimate price is time, as you said before.
100%. And like, we always talk a lot about fear and stuff like that, but courage is one of the key attributes you need to have in life, because you're constantly going to be coming up against things where you don't know what the outcome's going to be. And it's like that does inspire quite a bit of hesitancy in people. But I don't know. What do you think about that? Like, is there a certain perspective people should have around confronting situations that they're uncomfortable about? Or should they just continue to, I don't know, take the easy path of pushing it to a later date? Like, what should people be doing?
I think if your fears are chasing you, you got to turn around and face them. And that's the simple answer. You know, you probably need to engage in the things you don't want to engage in if you want your life to get better.
Yeah.
I tend to say this, I say this to people all the time. The only way out is in. You know, if you're in a shit situation, you probably got to eat more shit before you can get out of it. You know, if you're in a job you really hate, you've been there 3 years, you probably got to have to eat some more shit, save up money to go and do what you actually want to do. And even that change is going to be confronting and intimidating. But I think that is the solution. Do you prefer to do that today, or do you want to delay that for another couple of years?
Well, that's that whole thing of sometimes you got to take 3 steps back before you can start to move forward. It's like this thing of where you put yourself in these situations sometimes where you make things just barely tolerable for yourself.
That's right.
Well, it's all right, but it's not truly what you want to do.
That's right.
And by actually doing that, you've put yourself in this position where it's not so bad where it absolutely needs to change, but it's also not what you truly want.
That's right.
And that warm comfortableness is actually probably worse than being in a really bad situation. It's like it's more, I suppose, insidiously covered in a sense. Like, how do people get out of that situation?
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting point, and Hormozy talks about this, is that middle ground is actually the most dangerous, right? If you're in a job that you don't absolutely hate, and it's okay, and the pay's okay, and there's some good and some bad, that sense of comfortable, that sense of conformity, or you feel comfortable there so you don't leave because it's not awful. And that's actually the worst thing, because you end up staying in that state probably for your whole life. So when that's a situation, it's actually worse. It's actually better off that you're in just a completely shit environment so you leave, as opposed to an environment that's, average.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because it's much harder to change everything when it's not awful. Whereas everything's shit, you hate your boss, you hate the people you work for, it's only a matter of time if you leave. But when it's not absolutely awful, it's actually hard to make that change. But you still have to do it, right? It's still necessary.
So was that more about having perspective about your actual situation? Being like, it does need a change. I don't have to change it, but I'm going to change it so that I can live a better life in some sense.
I think it's having perspective about what your end goal is. What it is that you truly, truly want to do. And if it's not what you're currently doing, even if what you're currently doing is enjoyable and fun, it needs to change.
Yeah.
But all I'm saying is if it was absolutely garbage and awful, you would change it, because it's a hell. You're waking up every day, you're stressed, your heart's racing. But I guess in Australia where we live, that's not the case. Most people have jobs that they don't necessarily hate, but they'd rather not do them.
Yeah.
And because of that, they get pigeonholed probably for their whole life.
Yeah. Is that a short-term strategy though? Because you get the comfortability, you get enough money to live, you get all the things that might be necessary, but you don't get that extra thing. You know what I'm talking about? That X thing that is actually the thing that you truly want to be doing in your life. You don't get that. And I think when you don't get that, well, you don't actually get a fulfilling life. Like, yeah, sure, it's better than being on the street starving, but it's not a satisfying life. Like,
no, it is a short-term thing, but I think it plays out in the long run if you just delay. I'll have this conversation with him tomorrow. I'll start the gym tomorrow. I'll change my diet tomorrow. It appears to be a short-term thing, but I mean, it drags on for years.
Yeah.
If you were to ask me, do I think most people are living lives they truly want to live? Probably no. Why is that?
Well, it's the comfortability thing. And I asked you the question of, well, how do people get out of that? And it sort of relates to something, because we've talked about stress quite a bit, because there are the two aspects of it, obviously the positive and negative. But something called eustress is actually the motivating stress. It's the thing that gets you out of bed in the morning. It's the thing that actually compels you into action. You need a certain level of eustress to actually, say, complete an assignment or go out and run a 5K or something like that. And the thing is that it's actually different in every individual. You obviously know the type of person that leaves the assignment till the night before compared to the person that 2 weeks before had already done the assignment. It's like those two people have very different levels of eustress. So the person that doesn't do the assignment until the night before, there's someone that needs deadlines and they need something that's actually pressing on them before action can start. So it's like people that get themselves into these positions where they're comfortable in a job might need a higher level of eustress compared to someone that is very conscientious and actually just always is ahead of the 8 ball in some extent. And that's personality. But my point here is that if you're someone that just rides along, goes with the flow, just gets yourself in comfortable positions, my message to you would be is you need to increase the level of stress. And I suppose you need to give yourself deadlines and really concrete milestones to actually get yourself out of those situations. Because at the moment, your personality and your biology is not doing it for you to some extent.
You need to undertake more responsibility to force you to go down those avenues.
And that's quite a I don't know if it's a backwards thing. Like, well, you're not really that happy right now. Why would you take on more responsibility? But that's like you said, going in, like you said earlier, is actually the way out.
That's right. Yeah, that's exactly right. And what you said there is quite interesting. And I want to stay with the practicality for everybody, right? Because I guess you see online all these gurus, quit your job, quit your 9 to 5, do this. Yes, that there's merit in what they're saying, but it's not for everyone to go out there and be a Forex trader, make $1 million a week. It's to truly be residing inside an environment that you want to reside in, whether that's a different job. It doesn't have to be a business person. It's about taking actionable steps to create the life you want to live, right? When you were a little kid, you had all these aspirations, all these ideas about your life. Are you currently living that life?
Well, yeah, like you said, it's not about going out becoming a Forex trader. It's not behavior that's naive.
That's right.
It's about. Rockefeller said it as well. He said, "Plan boldly, but implement." What was it? He said, "Implement."
Like practically.
Practically, and it's like that's quite an important point because it's like. You might have XYZ aspirations, but you might not have the foundation yet that you need to actually go out and accomplish those things. So like in that situation, you have 10 mountains to climb before you can actually achieve that goal. Whereas someone that I suppose is naive and thinks in a sense arrogantly would go out and try and climb that mountain essentially straight away. And what that would lead to is a detrimental fall. That's something that could push you back way further than you started originally. I don't know if that makes any sense, but
you're saying someone might have the arrogance they're going to go and climb the 10th mountain off the bat. But you actually need to probably develop through those 10 mountains before you can go out there.
100%. Yeah. 100%.
Yeah, definitely. But I guess the courage to take that next step is what we're talking about here. And I think is what is quite profound.
Yeah. Well, yeah, courage is probably the point here. But I suppose pairing that with the actual practical, how do you change when you're comfortable, I suppose?
Okay, well, you got to have a plan. You got to have a plan. If you're in a job you kind of dislike, maybe you got to save money for 6 months. Maybe you got to save money for 12 months to give yourself a buffer. You got to have something to go out there and do. Maybe you want to start a flower business. You want to go and work somewhere else. Maybe you need a buffer.
Yeah.
You can't. It's not just to say, I don't like my job. I'm going to quit tomorrow and sit at home and be a couch potato. Right, you got to have a plan, and I think that's part of what you're saying there.
100%, and I'll use a personal example for this. I just moved out, right, and I think part of the ideology behind that and the thinking is that, you're comfortable at home, you have these sort of foundations that you can fall back on, but it's not until you remove those foundations that you actually have to build your own, and it's like. I probably didn't have enough eustress before doing that to actually compel me into the actions necessary for me to build a foundation to achieve the goals that I want to achieve. And it's like, that can happen at any stage of your life.
Right.
Maybe the job you're currently in is that foundation that's actually not helping you.
Yeah.
It's hindering you. And it's like, not until you, and this is where faith comes into it. It's not until you remove that and you have faith that things can change that you actually start to change.
Yeah, 100%. And like even a basic example like that is you moving out of home that's essentially going to burn those bridges at home. You're exiting a comfortable environment.
Yeah.
And it's those simple steps that in the long run, you're going to climb that mountain, right? It's starting with these simple things. And before you know it, you are at the top of the mountain. You've achieved all these things.
But I think making the point that it's not about the naivety like we discussed earlier. Like being naive would be me, say I wanted to be a musician or something like that. And I was currently in a job and I was like, actually, I'm just going to quit this job, move out to some other city, no foundation. I'm not even really doing the work right now that it would take. Like I'm not even proving myself on a weekend or something like that. That would be naive. And I think you'd suffer a greater fall than you would actually gain. Like perhaps there is that great opportunity there, but I think you need some level of confidence in yourself, and that only comes through proving yourself through action in an extent.
I guess confidence comes from doing things well. If you got no proof to prove to yourself that you're actually good at, being a musician, you're just having a punt.
Yeah.
Right. But are you still better off doing that, falling on your face and learning, as opposed to just sitting in an environment where nothing's happening?
Yeah, to an extent. But I think my point is that it could be a more detrimental experience for something that large, in that you're cutting all ties in your current environment, but you don't even have a basis for what you're going to do in the new city. Like, have you even played shows around your own town, or have you even got a social media or anything like that? It's like there are steps you need to take before you can take that leap of faith in an extent. Like it does need to be grounded in something.
I agree, but I would also say, contrary to that, I think ignorance and arrogance actually propel learning.
Right.
I think if you just throw yourself in a situation, you may not be up to scratch, but actually failing inside a situation that's 10 levels above you is going to teach you a lot more than staying inside a situation that nothing's happening. It kind of lends itself to learning.
I agree.
And I was watching an interview with, I forget who he was, and someone had asked him, how is it you exponentially did all these things in life? And he just said, I was just arrogant and I was ignorant to everything around me. And I'm not saying these traits are good to have. Obviously, arrogance is less than ideal, but he essentially didn't care about anything around him and thought, I can go and do all these stuff. And he failed a bunch of times and learned a bunch more than just taking advice from everyone and trying to, progress really slowly. So I think the advice is, have a plan, have actionable steps, but you still got to back yourself.
I mean, I completely understand the point that you're making, and I do agree that out of your comfort zone is where you're going to learn the most, for sure. I suppose the distinction I'm trying to make, and it's not contrary to what you're saying because I agree with what you're saying, but the distinction is that if you throw yourself into something so deep, you might damage yourself quite badly, and that might actually hinder your confidence moving forward. Because I think you need to have a certain amount of success to actually compel you forward. It takes a quite rare person that can actually tolerate huge amounts of failure without any reward. And those are the impressive people that, I suppose, start the massive businesses or undertake those things that people are inspired by. But everyone has a different tolerance for that to some extent. And that's where self-knowledge definitely comes into play, for sure.
Yeah, I agree. The majority of people wouldn't have a huge tolerance for failure. So what you're saying is start with something that if you were to fail in it, it's not going to completely demoralize you for the rest of your life.
Yeah. It's not going to destroy you in some sense.
Of course, yeah.
And even on Huberman's podcast on learning, he says the optimal ratio for learning is something like 60% of the time you'll succeed, 40% of the time you'll fail. He said that's sort of the optimal range.
Right. Yeah, they're all strong points and I think they're reasonable. But how do you do them today?
Yeah.
How do you engage in this today? We started talking about time, it's finite, all this stuff.
Yeah.
Everybody knows all these things, but they still don't do them, in a sense. I don't think anybody's sitting around thinking that they are going to live forever, but they live their lives that they are going to live forever.
I mean, what I will say is that I've been reading that book, Peterson's book. And essentially, he uses religious stories to explain essentially value hierarchies. And essentially, he's trying to detail what the optimal way of living is. And he does it through these religious stories, which are essentially stories that have been amalgamated by a bunch of different civilizations over time. And it's all of these stories coming together that actually have created these really condensed, very meaningful stories that actually, I suppose, are very integral in some sense. They're the stories of humanity in a way. And what he essentially says that God in these stories is actually the highest good. And what the highest good is essentially something that you can aim at. And it's like through, and your biology reflects this, through aiming at something and trying to progress towards it, your biology rewards you. It rewards you through pursuit. And it's like, I don't know, I think that's the next thing we should talk about, because how do you actually go about choosing what path to take? Because it's not a straightforward thing. Like, in the book, he details essentially that quiet voice inside of you is actually a transcendent voice. And we've discussed in previous episodes how your consciousness actually is a very minute amount of information compared to what you're actually perceiving subconsciously. And that subconscious actually, if you listen to it, can be tapped into through that voice in your head. So I don't know if any of those points you want to talk about, but
I mean, so you got a voice in your head. I think that voice in your head inherently knows where you want to go. Yeah. You talked about that pursuit where you kind of negate everything else and try to climb up that mountain. I think there is a voice inside your head, and I do agree with you. But I think in today's world, we just get crowded out by all this noise. You're constantly in environments at work with all these people, and there's ideas everywhere and possibilities everywhere. And then you go home, you're on your phone again, your judgment's crowded. You asked me the question, how do you actually go about identifying that? Yeah. You probably need a period of time where you just isolated it to actually think about your own thoughts, not what you're seeing online, not what your friends are saying. You know, what is it that probably is inherent to you and you want to do? Yeah. And then you got to say that I'm going to do this for the next 12 months.
On that point, it's very interesting because in the book he actually talks about revelation and he talks about transformational thought. He said that actually many times that actually occurs in periods of isolation. And it's not until you block out the external environment that you actually start to get access to this internal environment. And in some sense, your internal environment is the most important environment. And in a world where everything's so external, there's so much stimulation, it's like, how often do you actually have access to that internal world? How often are you actually hearing your own thoughts?
Yeah, I guess that's my point. I said not very often. Yeah. I think the majority of people's daily lives are crowded by these externalities to some degree.
And I suppose the point here is that he says that God, which is the good, the highest value, the thing that you should be aiming at, can present itself in many different ways. It presents itself in deep interest. It presents itself in, I suppose, opportunities that catch your eye. It's like these things are all beginnings in some extent. And it's like you're given the freedom to go down those paths if you want to do that. But it's like if you don't, I think you actually get punished psychologically in some extent.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a good place to kind of wrap up.
Yeah.
You do get punished for your inadequacies in life or your lack thereof. It's not just the things you do, it's the things you don't do in life that you're gonna pay for in the long run.
100%.
Right, and I think religious paradigms are quite powerful because I think the stories kind of resonate to, I guess, everything you do in life. I think the opportunities are there for the people that go out there and put themselves in situations. Right, it's not going to just come to you. You're not going to fall into it by accident.
Yeah.
I think it's all about that action component.
That's the difference between faith and hope.
That's right. You got to have faith that things are going to get better, but you can't just sit at home and hope
Hoping.
that you're going to fall into the life you want. Right? You got to create it in a sense, and just trust that the things you're doing are going to unfold in a favourable way. I guess to wrap up, we talked about time. We've talked about all these values. I would say this: if you don't change anything, it's very unlikely you're not living at all. Right? If you're inside an environment that you deep down know that is not for you, and you don't change it, do you exist?
Well, you exist.
In a philosophical sense, are you really living? Probably not.
You exist weakly. Because my final point is that he says essentially there's no difference between strong character and strong action and aim.
Yeah.
We are, in some sense, the amalgamation of our behaviors. If you are directionless, if you don't stick to the things that you say you're going to do, well, you're going to be a weak person. And it's your choice. Do you want to be a strong person or do you want to be a weak person?